Good afternoon. On behalf of the fraternity of Upnagar Shikshan Mandal's Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture and Environmental Studies, I welcome all to commemorate the life and teachings of Kamu Iyer. As wished by some of us, as well as his family, this commemoration is about celebrating what Kamu believed in and his teachings. The next 1 hour will be dedicated to remembering these teachings and the beliefs he has been able to inculcate amongst so many of us. I now invite our director, Anirudh Paul, to say a few words, after which Professor Lal, the Design and Technology Chair and Academic Council member, will reminisce about his interactions with Mr. Iyer. Paul, please.
Yeah, thank you, Vikram. We meet in rather very odd times like this. Otherwise, we would have met in the KRVIA auditorium. That is online. We meet to pay tribute to Professor Kamu Iyer, who had been associated with the KRVIA for a long, long time. In fact, I remember those days when actually Kamu had come with Charles Correa to college. At that point of time, both Kamu and Correa was involved in taking a studio in college, which was a very, very well-known studio. It was a studio being conducted on the mills of Mumbai and also done with, at that point of time, the first batch of KRVIA. And at that point of time, the whole project was about thinking about alternatives of what could be done with this area, the mills of Mumbai, and that became an exhibition which finally became the Charles Correa Committee report. The exhibition, there were many of the government people who were there that became the Charles Correa Committee report. But during this whole period, Kamu was very, very involved in this whole project. In fact, Correa looked for always to him for his advice and especially his knowledge about the city, exceptional knowledge about the city. In fact, he had such ethnographic knowledge about the city, which was phenomenal because he had lived through all of that. And a person like Correa also acknowledged about his understanding of the city. From there on, Sen is here with us actually. Sen had invited him to conduct many housing studios at that point of time, and after which he would then take thesis along in the KRVIA. So he was involved with actually guiding a lot of thesis students. I don't know if some of them are there today or not, but he was actually involved with actually guiding a lot of thesis students, and he would take various topics associated with the city, projects on housing, and some projects actually I know that have won the Charles Correa Gold Medal also. After that, when Kamu was in the college, he got a grant from the KRF, that is the Kamla Raheja Foundation, to write a book on G B Mhatre. And let me tell you, it was a very unusual book because it was one of the first of its kind to document architects who were previous to the modern architecture that we know done by the masters, which had its root in India. But previous to that, documenting architects' work and a very important period at that point of time in Mumbai's history, in Bombay's history, I would say rather. And he had documented the work of G B Mhatre and how these buildings actually would form a very important fabric of the city of Bombay. He actually, with that book also parallelly, he was the chair. He was the chair of design in the college. So he was very actively involved in advising on the subject of architectural design for KRVA for a period of 5 years. And after that, he became the academic council member. And he was an academic council member for a long, long time. Also, he was associated. It's not that he was just an academic council member. He was associated with many events in college. He was very active in conducting workshops. In fact, one of the workshops, again, a housing workshop that he conducted means he was leading that workshop, which was with MHADA and Yashada. They had actually financed that, funded that workshop. And KRVIA was involved in conducting that workshop for their employees. Finally, it came out as a publication also. So he was involved in that. So his association with the college was long. His association with education was long. In fact, he received the MASA gold medal for his contribution to design education, and it's also lifetime award for contribution to architectural education. So his recognition towards education was recognized clearly by MASA, and given his deep association with the college, he'll always be fondly remembered. Thank you. I would like to request Vikram to now take on again. Vikram?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. We now request Professor Lal to say a few words about his relation with him.
Thanks, Vikram. I came into the academic council of Kamla Raheja several years ago at the insistence of Narendra Dengli. And of course, it was like a breath of fresh air for me to come into this new academic environment, so friendly and so open. And to meet Kamu at the council meetings once every month was really not enough, because I could feel that we were in some ways kindred spirits. We seemed to have the same frame of mind, the same feel for education, and a real empathy for the student. It's something that you could sense all the time whenever Kamu contributed to our deliberations at the Academic Council. He managed to steer conversations in a bottom-up style, looking at how things happen in the studio, what students do, what keeps them energized, and how the school and the faculty needs to keep their energies and their interests up. He managed to steer discussions really from that direction, and was a very, I must say, a very sobering influence on all of us. It was a pity, it was a real pity that we could visibly see his health failing, not being able to climb up the stairs, not being able to walk around independently. And many a time I held his hand to visit our school loo together. But it was a very affectionate relationship that he had with all our members of the Academic Council. I can't forget, he once wrote me a letter. This was maybe about a year ago, a year and a half back, after we had met at one of these conferences in Goa, one big bash, and I had given a talk that Kamu happened to be there. And then after my talk, we had a long discussion between ourselves. And he said, Ashok, I'm trying to put down my thoughts about many projects in simple ways that will be accessible to everybody. Will you please act as a sounding board? I said, I'd be delighted to do that. It would be great. It'd be great learning from me, and it'd be a great support for you, because we just felt that we were kindred spirits. Unfortunately, I might have received just one or two pieces, and after that there was silence. And I'm really sad to say that for these last few months, after he stopped coming to the Academic Council, I really was not able to keep up my personal relationship with him, and sorely missed his presence. But he was a truly gentle soul who believed in being close to the ground, and a great empathy for everybody he worked with. His remembrances of Mumbai often came out. He says, when it was this 4-story, 3-story, 4-story amongst the trees, what a beautiful city it was. And it was a city for everyone. It was a city for everyone. And it was so peaceful and so quiet and so gentle. And, he couldn't understand. He couldn't come to terms with the turn that the city has taken with this intensive form of development, and how things have gone from intensity to greater intensity with the rolling out of real estate and business interests. He really couldn't come to terms with that. He knew where the balance of life in the city lay. For me personally, that was the greatest message that I received from him. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lal. We now call upon Vandana Ranjit Singh, our faculty and one of the people most close to Mr. Iyer, to introduce him, his work and his teachings. Vandana.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Ankush. Today we are here to pay homage to Mr. Kamu Iyer, always Mr. Iyer to me, the sublime person who was my boss. I'm afraid I'm going to be a bit emotional. He was my friend, my teacher, my philosopher, my guide. So I want to talk today about what does it take to have the good fortune to have someone like Kamu to be there for you when you're 23 years old and you walk out of architecture school into the world. That's the precious gift I had. And David Hockney, I'm sure you've been watching this BBC clip where he talks of running up and sitting in the front of a bus so that he could see more. Well, when I sat on the front of the BST bus, Mr. Iyer was sitting next to me so that I could see more. I could look around, I could read architecture, not like a book, but like a living experience as a part of who we were and the way we immersed ourselves in the city. There were many, many things to learn, too many right now. So for now, I'm going to talk about what were the qualities of this teacher of mine. The first was Sahaj, an effortlessness of being, in the way he worked with perfect humility and matched by a steady sense of purpose. And that's not all, it was leavened by a wry sense of humor. So that's what he taught us, that he never had an ego about things he did. He did them so simply, so directly. And everything he did was so important and so connected to what he was thinking at the time. The second is somehow, and that generation of elders that we all were fortunate to know had this ability to know and to do what's right. There was an integrity about them, a deep sense of ethics, which no college could ever teach us. There was no rhetoric, there was no political alignments, there was no sense of what mistakes somebody else had made. There was just a quiet conviction, and that's what he lived by. Whether it was, and even ordinary things like fees, contractors, clients, professionalism, it was all aligned to the way of his working. There was no two ways about it. There was just the way, and that was a very precious gift. Then, of course, as Ashok said, there was this innate kindness, a way of dealing fairly with people from all walks of life, with a sense of empathy. As for us, we took our doubts and confusions to him, and while he was there, we knew that all is well with the world, That was, he was our mentor, and we were, we could always go back to him much, much later in life when he needed us and he needed us just to chat with him so that he could, from home, COVID days were hard on him, just to be able to speak over the phone and share all those tales which we'd heard over and over again. It was a kind of giving back for all that he had done for us over the years. So these were attributes that we were so fortunate to experience and to walk along in the path of Mr. Iyer. He was our Pied Piper. As for us, there was, what he taught us most importantly was, there was no esoteric thought. There was just logic and a gift that he shared it with us. We could understand what he thought. We could understand where he was coming from. there was nothing obtruse about the way he approached his work. There were so many conversations and so many more that I think I shall miss. But now I want to talk about one other special gift, and that is his deep sense of history. And he had this sense of history of his, talked about a connectedness of things, of tapping into contemporary events around him, not just tapping into them, but drawing from those events threads of emerging histories. I mean, that's magical. You know, we just do not live in history the way he did. Everything that happened around him, he could feel where it was leading to and where it came from. And that was a very precious lesson. Then, of course, there was Kamu's pencil. Kamu's pencil brought each project as an adventure into the studios. He said, ask the right questions and the answers will frame themselves. I mean, Vikram, Shraddha, we've all heard that a million times, saying, ask the right questions. From these iterations emerged the core of the projects, you know, and what we all know from his books, this magical diagram that embodied his thoughts, and then which we, as the studio, could decipher and take forward and share and partake of. Each project was an immersing experience. But you know what was so special about him? When that project was done, he laid it aside and he moved on to the next one. He never looked back. He felt it was a job that needed to be completed. It was done and you moved on. It was only at the end of his long and varied career, and after much persuasion, and I think Charles Correa was very instrumental in persuading him, to gather up all this experience, to gather up all these diagrams. And then, of course, the rest is history. We have these 4 beautiful books of his that he's left behind for us. Kamu was the best of narrators. He rooted our work in the studio. He always told us these stories, and we've heard them over and over, and we know them. They're in his books. And when he talked, he rooted our work and linked in the studio and linked it to the context, whether it was Vitet, whether it was Batley, whether it was Mhatre, whether it was Bajpai, Bombay Improvement Trust, Hindu Colony, 5 Gardens, Khar Model New Town. These were words that I had never heard in Ahmedabad before, you know, and I just lapped them all up. I grew up with my grandparents on holiday at Khar New Model Town, but he told me how special it was. And these images rolled on and on and on. Each building, each street, each avenue of rain trees was examined. It had its place in this panorama of the city that he conjured for us. So today, Pranam to Kamu Iyer. He taught us to see more deeply, and to see with empathy. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana, for that truly wonderful tribute. We now invite Alpa Sheikh, structural consultant and another person closely associated with Mr. Iyer, to share her thoughts on him as an academic council member as well as a professional associate.
Thanks very much, Ankush, and thanks, Vikram, for inviting me. When somebody asked me to write a newspaper about him, I just felt I couldn't do it because for me, my relationship with him is so close. It was like I can't share it with anybody else. You know, I think this is a special group, and I think Vandana and Ashok have really paid very moving tributes. I'm going to share really not about my association with him in the academic council. That was there, but you know, that was shared with a lot of people. But you know, for me, I have spent many hours with Kamu in meetings, talks, events. But really, for me, my memories of Kamu will always be linked to the hour-long morning walks, you know, in the leafy neighborhood of 5 Gardens. He lived at Goldfinch for most of his life, and I lived just half a block away. And for years on end, my mornings began on most days, you know, just discussing the world of design, the world of people who inhabited our common spaces. And you know, I've always felt, and I think even Vandana talked about it, that he was such an interesting combination of wit and depth. You know, so at one level, we would have great fun discussing the local area. He would sometimes walk me to a particular building. You know, that area has a few Mhatre buildings and some Art Deco ones and some wannabe Mhatre buildings, and he would, you know, kind of very patiently take me through some of the very nuanced differences, and without ever being patronizing, or that, you know, I was not an architect but an engineer, and so maybe I wouldn't understand. Not at all. You know, he kind of just shared his world with me, and you know, we would together lament on the slow transformation of that area. But he would often say, you know, that the individual buildings don't matter so much. It is the scale of the buildings, the setbacks, and, you know, as we would walk along the majestic Baltiforum trees or the shirish or the mahogany trees over there, he would say, see, these trees overwhelm these buildings, and that's what gives the area its character. And then he would draw me into the history of all the first town planning schemes. You know, it was just so wonderful that here was this person who was a walking encyclopedia of what happened to Mumbai from 1930s. And I really believe that I used to egg him and nag him every day that, you know, it would be criminal if he did not write a book, you know. So I'm glad that at some point he, along with me, there were others also, and he actually wrote the books that he did. But he was so replete with stories, even of his years at Hindu Colony, and then of course, you know, the Parsi Colony at Goldfinch. And just simple things he would explain about, you know, 250 square yard plots in Hindu Colony versus the 500 square yard plots in Parsi Colony. Why Parsi Colony had so many more gardens than the Hindu Colony, and everything was based on historical and political facts. And it was very interesting. So, you know, I for some years I moved a little. I was in Matunga, but I was closer to the station. And then he said, "Oh, you're just facing the Napu Gardens." And I said, "Oh, do you know what Napu Gardens is about?" There were our Tamilians used to be there, and there used to be all of these political movements which started at Napu Gardens and the protests. And the Tamilians would say, "Oh, we are not leftists or we are not rightists, but we are typists." So he would always have something really funny stories, you know, to tell you. And he would even tell me, and I think it also comes in some of his books, that if he would walk through R.P. Masami Road, he would tell me of this very British Punjabi engineer who wore a tie and he was very proper, and how he taught him many engineering fundamentals. And, you know, there were also a rich treasure trove of gossip-laden stories of the many families of the neighborhood. And he had an amazing memory. And as what Vandana also said, that not only did he have this unbelievable memory, but he had this talent for joining the dots. And that's why I thought he was really one of the best historians that Mumbai has ever had the privilege of someone who would document also the story of Mumbai. And it wasn't just about the city, but he had stories of every architect in Mumbai. You know, all of the gossip too. And it, you know, for me, it was like, oh, okay, I'm going to lap it up. But it was just amazing how much he knew at every different level. And for me, I think the other thing which really stood out was his amazing clarity in life of what was the right way to live. He was upright not because he thought it was noble. I don't think he, you know, kind of carried that like this big, you know, cloak of honor or something. He just was the way he was because he simply knew no other way of being. I mean, you know, I remember once when we were walking by a morning gathering of the garden club, and I told him, "Oh, these guys have made this huge donation for so and so cause." It was a really large amount. And so he was quiet for a few minutes, and then he said, "You know, Alpha, if you live an honest life, I don't know how you can amass so much wealth." And I think those words really hit me because, you know, I mean, it's his whole style was that he shared what he had with everybody. He just was not somebody who was into acquisition. And, you know, while I would say he had amazing clarity, I also would like to say that he was amazing in the complete absence of dogma. You know, he may have had a negative view of a person or an organization, but he was always open to reconsidering his position in view of any new data or, you know, which was kind of shared with him. You know, one of the subjects which we would often talk about was his relationship with Charles Correa. I was fascinated by it, you know, and I would always ask for every little detail, you know, okay, so what did you say? What did he say? Okay, how? And then I would analyze it. And, you know, I'm sure others did that too, but he would always be very interesting in knowing how I interpreted the relationship. And I think that was one of the reasons why I felt that there was in some ways so many confidences that we've shared over the years, you know, in the mornings. Those were magical mornings, you know, over years. And I just felt I couldn't ever share it with anybody else. And, you know, but you know, it was just that there were many other people he and I would, you know, talk about, not just about Charles Correa, but other people also. I would turn, you know, the whole thing he would say this way and that, purely, you know, to understand human behavior. And we had great times doing that. And of course, he had a very wicked sense of humor, and he could just crack me up a lot. And I think also you absorb a person's philosophy, and you begin to have this admiration and deep respect for them, not from their pontification, because he was not that kind of person who would pontificate, but, you know, from the little things they do. So once I remember I had, you know, hopped over to Goldfinch, and Lalita aunty gave me a cup of tea. And it was lovely tea. So I just remarked on that. And sure enough, because they used to get it specially shipped to them from one of the tea plantations. And, you know, a few days later, there was a ½ kg package sent to me. And, you know, likewise, I think as what Ashok also said, you know, we would have talked of an article or a piece of writing in the morning. And sure enough, by evening, it would either be in my mailbox or personally delivered to me at my office. So I think this was what he was. You know, he was such a live wire. He transcended generations. I mean, it's very interesting that I call Lalita auntie, but I stopped calling Kamu uncle, I don't know, I think 3 or 4 decades ago. And one thing, you know, I think he was very uncomfortable with, and I think this is important to say, because, you know, we both came from, in some ways, professionally, you know, I'm being a structural engineer, I inhabit a slightly different world. And he was very uncomfortable with the love for power and money that drove architects and engineers to mega projects. And sometimes, you know, I would just discuss a project I was doing, and it could be a very tall building and stuff. And, you know, sure, it's exciting as a structural engineer to do something, you know, which is whatever, really interesting and challenging. But, you know, and I would talk to him about it and about the architecture in it, quite neutrally, actually. But I could see his discomfort. He was completely at sea with these kinds of large-scale, tall megaliths. You know, I suspect he wondered how we could, in good conscience, actually design such stuff. But he didn't judge you by it. You know, he respected that you have to do what you have to do. You know, and his affection for you was not not conditional. You know, it was just there. It was, and in some ways, I kind of felt that, you know, because I'm you know, more of I'm almost Chandru's age. I think, you know, I was. He kind of had that little bit of indulgent attitude towards me, and maybe, you know, that's why he wasn't judgmental at all. But, you know, I do know at times that he was so upset about some of the things that were going on that he did use words like fraud, frothy for some, you know, for some architects or architecture. And I thought it showed exemplary courage in this politically correct world to call out people. Though I suspect he didn't do it publicly. But you know, I like the fact that I have access to some of the things which he thought and felt, which maybe, you know, he may not want to have. It would not have been nice for him to have said it aloud. And I remember even in the last couple of years, while he was writing and trying to complete his books quite furiously, and you know, we have you know, I was over and Aditi was there, and Aditi and I also have been having some conversations in the last couple of years about aging parents, about mortality, about what it is for children who have to upend their lives and help out their parents. I mean, Aditi's, you know, Aditi is one of the people I really admire in my life. You know, she's quite something. She's amazing. She was a year junior to me in school, and so, you know, I've seen her grow over the years, and I think she's got that grace and intelligence from both her parents. And, you know, just to come back to what I was saying, that when he was working towards completing his books, he sometimes would talk to me very pensively and ask, you know, I don't know what kind of legacy, and, you know, I don't even know if in today's world, I think of myself as a failure, and I'm just kind of, you know, I'm looking at him and I'm saying, do you have any idea how much and how many people admire you for who you are, you know? But he would say, you know, in a world where suddenly size and scale began to matter, you know, I'm so marginalized. And I somehow feel, you know, it had to do a little bit with you know, his failing health, and also, you know, with the knowledge that many of his colleagues had passed on. But for me, you know, the last I met him, I talked to him after the passing on of Lalita Auntie, and, you know, we didn't expect this happening, right? So for me, and very interestingly, you know, in some ways I feel our destinies were so connected that the last home he was living in, that apartment building, was also the building I had lived in for 2.5 years before I moved elsewhere. So, you know, and just a few months ago when Mary was here, we had 2 evenings we shared with Kamu, and they were such fun-filled evenings. And I'm so glad that my memories of him are filled with so much of laughter and joy. I will always remember him as ageless, or maybe I should say, you know, he was timeless for me. And, you know, I think, and also, I think even Vandana and maybe Shraddha would agree with me, we've never thought of him as somebody of the opposite gender. You know, I mean, you could tell him anything you wanted, you know, and it was perfectly fine. And I think it's very difficult for me. You know, it's somebody of that generation I will miss very, very deeply. Thanks, Vikram, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Alpa. Prateek Banerjee is an alumni of this institute and also the young partner of Mr. Iyer at the Architects Combined. We look forward to hearing from him how his journey from being a student of Mr. Iyer to being his associate and partner has been at the Architects Combined. Prateek?
Yeah, good evening. I'm sorry. Good evening to everyone. Thank you for all the, it's been a very moving event, couple of weeks, and today is especially moving because you're getting all these memories and thoughts coming back to you. So I have just prepared a short note on what my feelings of Iyer sir, because I can't talk extempore as wonderfully as Vandana ma'am, Ashok Lal sir, and Alpa ma'am. So in the years when we were studying at KRVIA, Iyer sir was actively involved at the college. Looking back now, I realized that some of the defining influences of my student years were while working on the book he co-authored, 4 from the 50s, Emerging Modern Architecture in Bombay. Student groups from 4 Bombay colleges of architecture were selected to document and measure draw 4 exceptional modern buildings that came up in Bombay in the decade just after independence. These were Jahangir Art Gallery, Petroleum House, Darshan Apartments, and Tata Institute of Social Sciences. I was part of the group from KRVIA responsible for the documentation on Petroleum House. The 4 groups would meet regularly at Architects Combined to discuss the progress with Iyer sir. He would always ask our perspective on what we saw, encouraging us to develop our own language of architecture. Photographs and words never tell the real story, he would say. You have to go out and experience architecture to find out if it holds true for you. The simplicity with which he explained complex architectural ideas embedded in these buildings introduced me to a vocabulary on how to experience, observe, learn, and create architecture. The seemingly abstract relationship between drawing and the quality of three-dimensional physical space that it represented became clearer and relatable. The wonderful experience I had while working on the book had gotten over too soon. So on graduating in 2005, when I got the opportunity to work at Architects Combined with Iyer sir, I didn't have to think twice. And what an incredible journey it has been. Working so closely with him, first on building projects, then running a reputed practice with him, and finally being involved with his last two books, has helped define my core values on design, practice, pedagogy, and the self. Iyer sir always had a childlike openness and excitement. The mind was always open to fresh ideas. Whether it was a workman at site he spoke with, or something he observed on his travels, or while discussing a project with us, he was always receptive. "Hey boy, that's a wild idea. Let's see how we can develop it," he would say. A new project to him, whether similar in nature to the preceding one, was an opportunity for a fresh perspective. He embodied the words of Marcel Proust. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. A project to him meant being involved in all its aspects, whether it was a program, structure, services, specifications, estimate, and site work. There was always a passionate involvement with the sole aim of improving the project outcome. Blessed with a sharp analytical mind and a clarity honed over years of experience, Iyer sir could quickly see through the complex layers of a project and find the intrinsic quality that the project could have. This would provide the broad framework within which multiple ideas could be shared, discussed, and explored objectively till the best option would be found. An organic but truly collaborative methodology of working, which Iyer sir evolved and used successfully for all his projects, whether it be a building or a book he authored. The work always had its roots in a practicality and pragmatism, but Iyer sir was also a master at making a few sensitive gestures that added that intangible magic to completely transform them. It could be a curved wall with carefully proportioned openings dividing a regular rectangular space into two dynamic spaces, or a strategically placed triangular bay window that dramatically altered the quality of internal space and light. The window became a three-dimensional space in itself, providing multiple perspectives to the outside and the inside. Architecture is not only about the spaces an architect creates, but also how people use them to make it their own. His work was about control and sophistication. You did just enough to provide the canvas for the users to add their flourishes to it. He would say, you do not have to put all that you learn in architecture school in one building that you do. Leave something for the next job. Learning from experience was another key source of knowledge and growth. After a project completed, we would sit down to look impartially at all its aspects: design, details, specs, construction, quality, and cost. This unbiased knowledge that was gained disseminated into future projects, ensuring a continuous growth of the individual and the practice. Iyer sir looked at all architecture through these objective yet playful lenses to find its innate quality, both tangible and intangible. Never one to engage in nostalgia and be clouded by preconceived notion. Change was inevitable, and he engaged with it positively on his journey in search for clarity. He shunned societal hierarchies, always speaking to you as his equal. His humility and lack of ego disarmed you, and a conversation with him was always equitable. Listening carefully when you spoke, never preaching, romanticizing, or imposing his thoughts and ideas. His doors were always open to your ideas, and his calm persona allowed you to express yourself in the best way. A thorough professional with an overarching sense of fairness in his dealings with one and all, Iyer sir had a meticulous, organized, and completely involved approach in any work he did. I will always remember and admire the persistence and rigor with which he went about writing and designing his last two books. He undertook this just as he was turning 80, writing the two books on his beloved iPad. He wrote multiple complete drafts of the books after getting feedback on them from the several confidants he had shared the drafts with. He would consider all the feedback carefully and use it to find his path to constantly improve and make it better. For the book Bombay, From Precinct to Sprawl, we drove around the city several times to photograph buildings, areas, and spaces that form a substantial part of the book. There were multiple design and layout options which were considered before finalizing on one. It was more taxing and complex than any building project, as it was something we hadn't done before. But with his clarity of purpose, determination, and energy, we overcame all the hurdles. And what we have now with these two books is a simple, direct pedagogical framework for future publications based on the work and research done by Iyer sir and architects Kamla. He always found the broader perspective in things. The collective always took precedence over the self. These core qualities that made Iyer sir special were integral to how he lived. Zen-like in the way he conducted himself, he rarely lost his cool, never was rushed or had to try too hard. He would say, if it is becoming unreasonably complicated, we need to rephrase the question. There was a clear purpose, balance, and serenity with which he went about his life, always having time for other pursuits. He truly appreciated art, music, and dance. He enjoyed sport and movies, and even loved to discuss economics and politics. Being an objective chronicler of the built environment with a vast trove of knowledge, Iyer sir attracted scores of people. They were from all age groups and varied walks of life. You saw students, professors, historians, sociologists, journalists, architects, and so on, from all over the globe, walking through the doors of Architects Combined to meet him. But it was his open, inclusive, and humble nature that had a number of them returning, becoming close friends over time. He enjoyed the company of students, and his clear, direct, and quietly charming way of speaking made him approachable. In many ways, he was a student throughout his life, always engaging with and seeking new learning experiences. Our mentor, master, and exemplar is no longer here with us. I will miss Iyer sir and his generous, endearing spirit. However, the principles he stood for, the working methodologies and knowledge that he evolved and shared, will continue to guide us. Based on essential truths that are universal, they will always remain valid. It is for us to realize their deep value and embrace them. People never learn by being told. They have to find out for themselves. We at Architects Combined and his family thank you all for attending and for your emails, articles, messages, and calls over the last weeks. I would like to thank Aditi, Chandru, and Iyer sir's family for being here with us. My co-partners at Architects Combined and KRVIA alumni, Abhijit Doshi and Pratik Sheth, for being together on our journey. Last but not the least, I thank KRVIA for organizing this wonderful event where we could celebrate the life of Iyer sir, a truly remarkable architect and human being. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pratik. Shraddha Sejpal is a faculty at the Institute and, like Vandana, has been very closely associated with Mr. Iyer, his works and his publications. I now invite her to share her experiences as well as introduce the voice recordings of some more people who were closely associated with him. Shraddha?
Thank you, Ankush. Good evening, everyone. There have been some really touching and warm tributes by people who have been so closely associated with Mr. Iyer. I would like to just share some personal stories of time spent with him in various capacities. It was 7 a.m. on the 19th of September when my phone rang. The name across the screen flashed, Chandru Iyer. I got the sad news. It did not register. No, how can Mr. Iyer, I said. But Mr. Iyer just called me the day before with the good news that his book was going on sale on Amazon and that he was feeling much better for us to resume our recording about the book. After I disconnected, I sat in disbelief and a rush of memories came flooding in. of all the unfinished work and conversations. The next few days saw a string of articles in newspapers and social media about him. There were some truly touching pieces written by friends, colleagues, and students. But somehow, grieving on media, social or otherwise, did not occur to me. However, I wish to remember him as a mentor, as a guide, as a sensitive architect, as a teacher, as a person who was lucid in thought, word, and practice, as a professional who relentlessly asked the what, the how, and the why when working on his own projects or analyzing or writing articles about other projects for magazines and his blog. July 1982. It was the second month when I had joined Architects Combine as a fresh graduate from CET. They had just won the competition for the MHADA office building at BKC. I joined the team to prepare the working drawings. I had taken some originals home to complete work for a meeting on Monday. While traveling from Vileparle to Colaba, I placed the roll of tracing on the luggage rack so it could be safe from getting crushed in the crowded train. When I reached the office, I realized that the drawing was left behind in the ladies' compartment. I spent the morning rushing between Churchgate Station to Superintendent's office and the arriving trains to no avail. I went back to the office empty-handed and was trying to muster up the courage to tell my new boss of my ghastly mistake. I still remember standing before Mr. Iyer, waiting to be admonished. Instead, what I got was a series of stories of how he forgot drawings on long-distance trains and flights. Just as he finished his stories, we received news that the drawing was found. No raised voice, no reprimand. That's how Mr. Iyer made me a lifelong admirer. February 1993. I had just returned from the US after my graduate studies and work experience. Chandru Iyer had come to Boston for work after graduation while I was there. We had often talked about returning to Mumbai and working on projects together. By the time I returned, Chandru had moved to work in Bangalore. On a visit to Mr. Iyer, I related this story. Without missing a beat, he asked me to associate with him and Chandru on a project in Sandur. It gave me a feeling of landing on my feet when I returned after 8 years. The client, Sandur Laminates Limited, was an export-oriented unit. That product, a copper-clad laminate, intrigued me. I proposed that we make that product the protagonist of the design and clad the building with it. The idea was examined and debated thoroughly and then finally welcomed by Mr. Iyer. It ended up becoming the signature element of the building's design. 1993 to 2020. I participated in various built projects, his books, his blog, or our podcasts. Aside from all this, Mr. Iyer could be counted on as a thoroughly reliable database of everything architectural and more. His memory and recall were eidetic. His willingness to share, legendary. Mr. Iyer jokingly referred to Architects Combine as a club. The membership was lifelong. It did not end when you left his practice. Call it a club, or a laboratory, or a culture. All those who have passed through the portals of this institution espoused integrity and a thirst for knowledge, and no tolerance for jargon-filled obscurity. It was a place where experimentation was the norm, a place you could return to wearing different hats, a place where you could go to seek guidance on a project and offer suggestions on another. Not just architects, every agency that dealt with Architects Combined learned from the experience and became lifelong members themselves. I have to say this to Chandru and Aditi, and now Anjana, Nakul, and Nayantara, that we too are proud recipients of his legacy. Thank you. Now we are going to have a number of recordings that we put together of people who have associated with him in various capacities. Ankush, I don't know the order, so maybe if we begin playing it, and if they need introduction, I will do so.
Kamu Iyer was a gentle giant we lost. All institutions, big and small, seeking his advice. All individuals, famous or not, would include him in their teams to resolve their academic issues on hand. He would smile like an angel to get into gentle argument and help resolve the dilemma. His life's work is exemplary, neither dramatic nor sulking away, as he was never an opportunist. His work, both professional and academic, showed a fine sophistication, suspension between logical and magical. His office in Mahim was a dream place for students wanting to do internship and hoping to get a job later, to be closer to their master. I always wondered how he kept all his partners at bay, as I always thought architects cannot combine. Few months ago, I called Kamu to say hello, and he replied, "I am feeling weak," and then kept silence. Today, the tall stalwart is no more with us. I feel our profession is without a guardian. I'll miss him forever. Kamu was a noble man.
Hello, this is Narendra Dengle, October 6, 2020, on Kamu Iyer as I see him. I first met Kamu Iyer at a seminar on architectural quality in the design of low and middle income housing held in Pune by Isa at the Pune Club in June 1988, where we were both speakers. He took an interest in my paper and wrote asking me to send the full text. Got to know him better at KRVIA in Mumbai from 2006 onwards, where I took over from him the design chair for the next 5 years. We continued to interact at the Academic Council even after both of us held no position there. We also had an opportunity to meet up to look at many students' theses and discuss their design ideas, concepts, lateral perspectives in comprehending urban issues at the Charles Correa Gold Medal Thesis jury between 2006 and 14. This was interesting because Charles was very keen on these discussions and had also roped in Sen Kapadia, Ravi Hazra on the panel. Later, some other architects also participated. I remember discussing several entries by students in detail on the spot. He always had his wits about himself and could look beneath the facades of many of his contemporary architects. I believe him to be one of Charles's closest contemporaries, whom he admired, but not blindly. In a way, he always had his ear to the ground. Both of them knew Bombay well and had some interests about real issues and that the profession faced, including urban densities and equitable distribution of space in the metropolitan city like Bombay. His architecture was least pretentious. His Sidco housing has wonderfully grown, people making changes in their dwellings and so forth. He also was full of admiration for Charles's Belapur housing, where he believed that the issue of open spaces was handled most effectively, no matter how the build form altered later. The first thing that struck me was Kamu's phenomenal memory. I remember asking him about some projects in Mumbai, which I was interested in documenting. He told me the names of architects, the year when these were built, the stories belonging to the project, and his own critique of these projects. It was clear from his interest that he was a keen observer of the growth of Bombay to Mumbai and knew with precision what happened when that shaped the form of the metropolis. He was a good critic of urban processes in Mumbai and architecture in general. His critique of some essayists also showed that he disliked contrived, forced writing and any entanglement with being too verbose. His practice was, in a way, quite unique in that it was called Architects Combine and involved 4 or 5 of his contemporaries. I knew one of them closely, G B Mhatre, who was my senior colleague at the SPA in New Delhi. Finally, he was the only one left behind. He also made younger architects his partners, who continued to run the firm even today. I once asked him to write about the method the partners adopted to practicing their craft at his studio. I believe that some young practitioners would learn from something like this. Some notes of his would be very useful. In a long conversation, which we often had on phone almost till the fortnight before he passed away, he told me the whole story. I thought it would be useful for young architects to learn about it. We both talked about J. Krishnamurti, whom we admire, and also the Upanishads. He was quite aware of the traditional wisdom without eulogizing it and was quite sarcastic at times of Tam Brahms, the community to which he belonged. Once he also told me the visual diarrhea in architecture of the South that obsessed ritualism. He sent me the draft manuscript of his book, Bombay, from pressings to chawl, twice for my response. It was then called The Ideas and Events That Shaped Bombay. And I read them carefully and responded as well. I think he sent it also to Alpa Seth. I still have copies of those drafts with me. He worked like a craftsman on his book and circulated it openly for reviews by others before going into publication, looking for not praise, but a sound critique from others. Once received, he would discuss that with many others. This was his way of plodding through, which sometimes I found difficult. He came to my house in Pune a couple of times, and once also with Hema Sankliya, and we had lunch together. Kamu with his wives, Charles and Monica and Uttam Jain came to the NCPA, where my wife Vidya was giving a violin concert. After one of our juries, Charles, Doshi, Sen, Kamu and Ravi Hazra, we went to Wellington Club for dinner. All made sketches and notes in my sketchbook, and Kamu wrote, and I quote, "At Wellington Club, where past continues in the present, great being there," dated 16th May 2007. I remember chatting with him on the project of architecture in Maharashtra, which I was interested with, and by the state government. And we discussed so many things, and his advice was very useful. Over cups of filtered coffee for an hour or two. On 16 March 2018, when he gave me the copy of his book, Building That Shaped Bombay, it was on the works of G B Mhatre, and autographed it, writing for Narendra, with whom a conversation is so fulfilling that it is difficult to stop, unquote. It would be difficult today, if not extremely rare, to find someone like Kamu who's knowledgeable about tradition while being watchful about the current situation in architecture, liberal in ideas, curious to learn from others, especially the young teachers and students with insightful observations. His narration of the story of his ancestors, which he gave me once on the phone, was quite intriguing. In the pre-Bhudan days of Vinoba Bhave, who, as he would say, actually were very willingly, his ancestors very willingly returned a huge parcel of land back to the villagers, gifted to them by the king, saying it actually belonged to the villagers and none had any right to take it away from them. I asked him to write this story down. The work now will have to be done by some researcher very seriously, and I think it would be a very useful thing to do. Thank you.
I knew Kamu since 1983 when I was an intern in his office, Architects Combined. Since then, Kamu was a mentor to me as I embarked on my own journey as an architect. Kamu embodied the ideals of a free, independent India in his life and in his work. He was a great soul who touched so many and whose like we will not see again. He inspired many generations of architects, first through his work, which was extremely sensitive and pragmatic, and then through his teachings and research. Kamu was all about grace, dignity, and humility. We will all truly miss him. My sincere condolences to Chandru and Aditi. May his soul rest in peace.
Greetings. My name is Shantanu Poredi. I'm an architect and I teach at Kamla Raheja. As a child, from the age of 5 to 17, I was fortunate to have studied in a boarding school in Sandur, Karnataka, designed by Kamu Iyer. I would meet him during his visits to site and watch him interact with the local stonemasons. School felt like a place where landscapes and buildings merged into each other seamlessly and made education into an enjoyable experience. And I thank Kamu Iyer for that. Professionally, I had the opportunity to work with him for 4 of my formative years as an architect. In office, there was never a sense of urgency, but there was always a sense of purpose in what we did. He spoke about the importance of exposure through traveling, higher education, and engagement with academia. He also spoke about aspects of practice, a practice that comes to you, and the other, a practice that you can drive towards. And how both these are important in the evolution of an office. Now that he has left us, I am sure he is with his close friends of Architects Combined, Dilip Rohit, Mandrekar, G B Mhatre, and my dear dad Raja Poredi. Kamu Iyer, rest in peace.
नमस्कार. कामू अय्यर सरांचा स्वभाव शांत व चेहरा नेहमी हसतमुख प्रसन्न असायचा. 5th इयरच्या ज्या विद्यार्थ्यांना त्यांनी गाईड म्हणून मार्गदर्शन केले त्या विद्यार्थ्यांमध्ये देखील मला बदल झालेला आढळला. त्यांच्या ऑफिसमध्ये खूप वेळा माझे जाणे झाले. तिथे न मी स्वागतच झाले. त्यांच्यामध्ये वक्तशीरपणा होता. ते नेहमीच वेळेच्या अगोदर यायचे. गव्हर्निंग काउन्सिलच्या मीटिंगला आले की ते नेहमी लायब्ररीमध्ये यायचे आणि लायब्ररीबद्दल चौकशी करत असत. त्यांनी 2000 साली बिल्डिंग दॅट शेप्ड बॉम्बे वर्क्स ऑफ G B Mhatre हे पुस्तक लिहिले आणि ते पुस्तक देशाच्या कानाकोपऱ्यापर्यंत पोहोचले. त्या पुस्तकाच्या विक्रीस त्यांनी खूपच मदत केली. सरांचे दुसरे पुस्तक बॉम्बे फ्रॉम प्रिसन टू स्प्रॉल हे पुस्तक देखील मास्टरच्या मुलांना खूपच उपयोगाचे. परमेश्वर त्यांच्या आत्म्यास शांती देवो व त्यांच्या शोकाकुल परिवाराला दुःख सहन करण्याची शक्ती देवो. नमस्कार.
Hello everyone, I am Amit Pandit. I feel lucky because I was one of Kamu Iyer's students. I also got to know him personally as I worked with him. His passion for architecture and his exemplary designs always inspired me. He will always have a special place in my heart. May his soul rest in peace. Thank you.
As all of us have gathered here today to remember Kamu, somebody we lost a few days ago, I have to begin by saying that every time I think of Kamu, I realize how much I miss him. Kamu Iyer was obviously much senior to me, and I met him as a very senior architect, first when I went to Architects Combine, actually to get a job at his son's office in Bangalore. And he said, "Why do you want to go to Bangalore? Why don't you just work here?" And I said, "Where?" So he said, "Here in Architects Combine." And I was most elated to get a job at Architects Combine, my first architecture job as a student who would have just cleared third year at that point in time. And from that point onward, to long interactions with him at KRVIA as a thesis guide, a thesis mentor when we entered our thesis year, and later with whom I shared many research and conversation journeys. From a senior mentor to an architect whose name we heard very often as young students, as young practitioners, to being a friend, I've been privileged to be a part of Kamu Iyer's life in that way, and to have Kamu Iyer in my sort of professional and personal life in that way. What Kamu leaves back is a very important legacy and a very important message. A legacy that you can measure in his built works, a legacy you can measure in his writings, but I think most important, and I think that's why some of our memories are very important, because I think what Kamu Iyer leaves back for us is the idea of what values and ethics mean. And as I said in a recent piece that I wrote on Kamu, he was the complicit critic. He was within the field of practice, he was making buildings actively, he was teaching actively more and more, he was involved in research, in fact worked on a couple of buildings, writing their sort of histories and making drawings of them along with him. He was there in the thick and thin of making architecture, producing architecture, through making buildings, through teaching, etc. And in the thick of things, he was probably the biggest critic of architecture and architects. And I think that is something what everybody respected and appreciated, this ability to be within the field of practice and yet have the most critical eye to talk about it, to review it, and not only review it for himself, but make all of us around him reflect. Reflect upon what it means to be architecture and what it means to be architecture today in the India that we all sort of live and occupy. And that I think is very important for us, because at all stages what we miss in architecture is the possibilities of reflection. Architecture very often is at the threat of turning into a certain kind of a polytechnic, a certain kind of a technological imagination, or only a certain kind of a theoretical imagination, a certain kind of a argumentative persuasion. But what is important is how argumentative persuasions meet the possibilities of built and material realities. And the way sort of Kamu practiced and at the same time could have long debates and arguments with all of us, pushing all of us along with himself. He was never out of it. He pushed himself and took all of us along with him, and pushed us and took himself along with it. I think that ability is something that we will sorely miss, because I think in that process, in that journey of sharing and friendship, we learnt a lot from Kamu. I'll end this little note by remembering one instance. in January 2016, when we opened the State of Architecture exhibition, which Rahul Mehrotra, Ranjit Hoskote and myself co-curated, an exhibition which was at the National Gallery of Modern Art and ran there for 3 years, and luckily we had a large national audience even coming for the opening. What we had decided as curators, that rather than sort of calling this personality or that personality to sort of inaugurate and open the exhibition, we said let's call all the senior architects that are around from Bombay, and let it be. And if we travel this to Delhi, we could call all the senior architects from Delhi to inaugurate the exhibition there. So let's have a certain kind of a sense of a professional community coming together to open it. And we had Brinda Somaya, we had Kamu Iyer, we had I.M. Kadri, we had Neera Adarkar, and we had Hafiz Contractor. If I don't think I'm forgetting a name here. And what was interesting is that when Kamu came to light the lamp, he got the loudest ovation. And that moment sort of still brings a certain kind of an emotion back. And I remember Nandita Korea mentioning this, that it's interesting that Kamu would get the loudest ovation in a gathering that was not only Bombay but was national. That a certain respect that he commanded as a professional and as a teacher is something that is of value, and it only shows that a certain sense of values and ethics goes far, and hopefully we'll be able to keep that important learning and memory of Kamu alive with all of us. Thank you very much.
Kamu Iyer's contribution to the architectural community as an educator and a practitioner speaks for itself. So I'm just going to, let that be. More than anything, I think he leaves us with the faith that integrity, grace, and kindness are actually enough to take you wherever you want. And for that, I will always be thankful to him.
Kamu sir has always been and will still be a great inspiration for me. I've known him for many years, since my time at KRVIA. His passion for architecture design and teaching is unforgettable. I also cherish the memories of working with him at Architects Combine. He was the perfect mentor, not only for the career as an architect, but also for life in general. He will be truly missed.
I am Ekta Idnani and I graduated from KRVIA in 2003, and my first job was at Architects Combine. Iyer sir had also been my design mentor in the third year architecture design studio. What I'll remember most about him was his childlike enthusiasm for even the smallest of details. That's one thing I hope I can imbibe and carry forward within myself also. I am grateful to have known him and worked for him.
Hi everyone, I'm Trina Shah. My first interaction with Kamu sir was during my final year. He was my design dissertation guide. It was amazing to see and learn how in every conversation sir could translate and describe his ideas in the form of simple sketches. I will always remember him as a humble person, brilliant architect, and my greatest mentor. His clear thought process, simple design ideas are unmatched and have created long-lasting influence on me. Thank you, sir, for everything and teaching me so much.
Thank you, Shraddha, for that very moving talk, as well as the compilation. Thank you, Vandana, Shraddha, Pratik, and Ankush, of course, for putting it together. With that, I just close by saying that Mr. Iyer's works and thoughts reflected simplicity stemming from deep connect with all that is around and an ability to crystallize what needed to be done. KRVIA has been blessed to have teachers like Kamu guiding its students. We pray that the simplicity yet gracefulness of his work and life inspires us as well as the future generations. With that, I bring the session to a close. If there is anything that I have missed out, my apologies in advance. But otherwise, I think we close the session. It has been wonderful. Thank you, Akshay Raheja, Kamla Raheja, Institute of Architecture, Architects Combined, Chandru, Aditi, and the family. Thank you all for being over here today to celebrate a life which was so precious to us. Thank you.